Hi everyone, and thanks, Ron. It's my pleasure today to have Linda Groarke in attendance. Um, Linda and I first met at a company called Diageo. So Linda is a very experienced and very senior Scrum Master. She is working in what I would consider to be a pretty complicated team environment, just from a product perspective, as well as sort of how the teams were formed. And as things sort of unfolded, Linda has also recently attended some of the new Disciplined Agile Lean Scrum Master workshops, which is why the tagline I have for Linda is Upskilling Energy in Abundance. She, as she just recently mentioned before we got on, a bit of a thirst has been awakened for knowledge, and so her participation in the workshops was so great, and the questions that she provided, and then just the interaction with the other team members, I thought it would be great to have somebody like Linda share a bit of the experience of having such a great foundation in Scrum, but then moving more into what Disciplined Agile has to offer. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so it is just us. And Linda, how about I turn it over to you? And
Great. Yep. Happy to. So hi everyone, and thanks to Joshua for inviting me here today to talk about my Agile journey, which began way back in 2005. So I thought I'd just start with a brief background, bit of history for me in terms of where it all began. So I read writing and publishing at university, so about as far away from coding and technology as you can get, or so I thought. My first job out of uni was for medical publishers Elsevier. And within a couple of years working on their print journals, I moved across to their online platforms, and there entered my first bit of exposure to working with software development teams. Looking back now and knowing what I know now, I can tell you that they thought they were doing Agile, being Agile, but in actual fact, they were still in a waterfall mindset. And I had Gantt charts and lack of visibility and collaboration as evidence of that. The requirements I handed over to the dev team were developed and tested and eventually deployed into production. Great. I didn't give it much thought as to the process or the mechanics behind how it all hung together. I thought I was so far removed from it, or how could it possibly have anything to do with me, all this technical stuff. After about 5 years, I was made redundant from Elsevier. The development team was moved to India. The business side was going to be handled from the North American office. But I saw it as a potential and the opportunity that it became to be. I set up my own company and started to work as an independent business analyst, and I haven't looked back. Within a week of leaving Elsevier, I joined a government agency for teachers who again implied that they were doing Agile, being Agile. They had lots of theory, but knowing what I know now, I saw little practice of this. Again, requirements were handed over to dev teams who developed and deployed, but there was no real collaboration at a team level, even the most fundamental basics of any Agile practice. It wasn't until I joined RBI, Read Business Information, in 2009 as a business analyst that I was first introduced to Scrum and an Agile way of working in much more detail. I think it was on day 2, I was eagerly asked by one of the developers if I had my poker planning cards ready for the sprint planning session we were about to have. I remember thinking, my what cards for what session? But they were so gracious with me, as I honestly find most development teams are. They took the time to explain that for the project I was brought in to assist with, we were going to be developing and deploying using Scrum. I had no idea what they were talking about, to be honest, but my intrigue grew and I started to read up on Scrum. I read all about backlogs, product owners, sprints, etc. And then, of course, the role of the Scrum Master, which is where I saw my calling. And so decided to embark on a 2-day course to become a certified Scrum Master here in London, courtesy of Mike Cohn. And for anybody who knows Mike Cohn, he knows a thing or two about Scrum. So needless to say, I came away from the course with a really solid foundation, understanding of what Scrum is, its benefits, how to implement it, etc. But it also allowed me to see where it hadn't been implemented so well, which is as empowering. It allowed me to see where it had been shoehorned maybe into a team because it ticked the we're doing Agile box rather than being of actual use or value. And we know that Agile is not there to solve problems, or at least this is my take. It's there to highlight them. And it does this really well if you embrace it. And now with my increasing knowledge and awareness of what good should look like, it's becoming easier now to identify those gaps and room for improvement. Um, so with a much, after doing the course, I now had a much better understanding of what RBI was trying to do, the method they were trying to follow. So I was able to participate in the daily stand-ups, the sprint planning sessions, all that good stuff that I hadn't known about only a couple of months prior. There was no dedicated Scrum Master, so I stepped into the role for the first time and cut my Scrum Master teeth, if you like, with RBI. From RBI, I moved on to the Times online website, who were putting up a paywall in front of a newly designed website at the time. So here, the team was already established. Again, they were following Scrum at a team level. The practices were all there, a little vague. If anything, when I joined them, they were in a post-agile phase, if you like. There's probably a better term than that, but they were so comfortable now with their way of working and had clearly come together as a team over the weeks and months of working together, that the lines were starting to blur, particularly where the practices and processes they were following, they were still delivering. They were just in a comfort zone, if you like. And I got it, I understood. The end was in sight for them. The paywall going up was a huge deal at the time. It was controversial, it was exciting, it was unknown. But for me, this was probably the most challenging role and time in my career, trying to fit in with that team and try to take, established ways of working, things that they had kind of got used to try and maybe try and bring that back in. From the Times, I jumped over to the Financial Times, again, working with a team of software developers in redesigning a couple of sister sites for the FT. To be honest, this was fairly straightforward, bog standard Scrum, out of the box. In 2011, I found myself working in New York at Morgan Stanley, and in 2012 for Goldman Sachs. Both banks were looking to implement the same tool, but had a very different approach as to how to develop it. At Morgan, they had fantastic user-centered design approach and did a lot of understanding of their customers. They spent time with them, they involved them in every step along the way. They had them naming the tool, they were developing, they had them naming the tool they were developing, but they also had them involved in user feedback. So they would sit them down in front of the tool frequently and go through it and take their feedback and then feed that back into what we were trying to develop. It was a really great way of working. But on the tech side, it was a different story. We had business requirement documentation, BRDs, that were in huge A4 ring binders that were carried from meeting to meeting. They were exquisitely kept up to date by our product owner. There were no online tools like Jira or Azure DevOps. If anything had happened to that product owner or ring binder, we were going to be in serious trouble. For Morgan, it was a bit different, as I was on the business side, bringing some domain knowledge to the table for a specific CMS they were looking to adopt. But on Goldman Sachs, I was very much on the tech side, working with a team of 20 or so developers as a Scrum Master. Scrum was chosen method, and for the most part it worked. The business was willing to trust and come along on the journey. The challenges here were perhaps not having the right people on the ground, blending the dev team with project and BAU work, who were also shutting down end-of-life systems, all within the same backlog and teams. It was just a little bit more confused, I want to say. It was also difficult having developers who were literally on the other side of the world. So we were in New York, they were in Singapore. It was night and day. It became really difficult to interact and build up that one notion, build up that one team notion. After 4 great years of working in New York, I moved home, picked up a job with a small consultancy with big names based in London, and fortunate enough to work as a Scrum Master with the Mayor of London, Burberry, a fast food chain from Saudi Arabia called Herfy. So
Lots of experience with Scrum.
Lots of experience with Scrum.
Yep.
Coming on to Disciplined Agile, I joined Diageo in February 2019 as a Scrum Master, which was at an exciting time for both the team who I was going to be working with and the organisation. So the team, we were going to start developing towards a brand new application on a brand new Salesforce org. But Diageo had also made the decision to transition away from a traditional project delivery method and mindset to an agile one, where we'd start to talk products instead of projects and outcomes instead of outputs. We were looking to develop and deploy an MVP within 7 months. The team were geographically distributed across 6 countries, 5 time zones, and 11 different nationalities. So a truly global product in every sense of the word. However, with all of that in mind, I quickly realized that Scrum out of the box wasn't going to be enough on its own, especially with an agile transformation happening in parallel with our product being the guinea pig, if you like. But luckily for me, the senior leadership had already figured this out and had turned to Disciplined Agile to help it scale using the wealth of tips and tools and suggestion it provides to help with ultimately the change management exercise adopting an agile mindset and culture is. The area of Disciplined Agile that immediately stuck out for me and really drew me in was around its principles, with delighting its customers at the core to being pragmatic, which pragmatic for me is one it's one that I really love. And instead of offering a one-stop shop on how to deliver software, it was offering several different ways. It was giving us choice. And this really resonated, and my intrigue in Disciplined Agile grew. It was also my first introduction to Josh, as he was Diageo's main ambassador for helping to disseminate knowledge around Disciplined Agile through training, workshops, shadowing, etc. Josh introduced community of practices whereby all Scrum Masters were invited to join. I think it was a bi-monthly meeting to discuss key issues, ask questions, share knowledge, all that good stuff in our respective communities. The Agile life cycle was chosen as the one that made most sense based on our current setup. We understood what our customers wanted. We had a product owner who'd been in the field. I can't say that we did lots of user-centered design. We didn't engage in terms of end users. We relied on our product owner who had worked in the field as the customer who was driving the requirements. We wanted to release into production often. That was a goal. We knew that our requirements wouldn't be changing on a level that would be so disruptive that it would suggest going down a lean way. And we were willing to embrace a healthy disruption and embrace a new way of working, which meant that all roads led to the Agile lifecycle. And as most of you know, it's the closest to Scrum. So for me, it was a fantastic blend, an opportunity to put into practice my experience and knowledge of what is needed and what it takes to establish a team and get the wheel spinning. So working alongside our product owner and keeping as close as possible to the inputs needed for each milestone at the inception phase, we created a vision for the team. So our product owner put out a vision. We had a collaborative area where we kind of shared all this documentation. The technical architecture strategy was created and aligned with the enterprise direction. The test strategy was born, so we had our documentation there. We formed the team. In terms of this being at the inception phase, that's probably not quite true.
Yeah, I mean, part of what,
If anything, the vision. Did you want?
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, it looks like the video just cut for just a second. Yeah, in part of what Linda's describing, and just I'll add a little bit of context to it as well, is that I mean, this was a really complex situation because she's describing a product that has needed core functionality or functionality that was being built, and then the way that product was going to be deployed into multiple markets, and because of the type of product line that they're in, there were lots of different rules and regulations. It brought a tremendous amount of complexity to just from a requirements perspective to implement something that was going to be in the product, and then different variations based on country or again market that it was going to. So looking at things like forming the team, and is it a kind of a feature arrangement versus a component arrangement, or a core team, core functionality team versus having market teams. Those are all of the things that were experimented with, at least the time that I had spent with that area of the organization, and very, very complicated situation.
Yeah, yeah. And I probably don't do it justice. When you're in the throes of it, you're going with it. But looking back, yeah, it is complicated, or can be. But I think we've got our wheels spinning for the most part. Today, the team that I've been involved with from the start, we're now in our 36th sprint. We're doing really well. I'm pleased to say that we're regarded as a high-performing team and considered a success story when it comes to adopting Disciplined Agile within Diageo, which is great.
Which is great, yeah.
Yeah,
That
it is. Yeah, it is, and it's gone from strength to strength. It really has. what we're doing, they're looking to potentially deploy rollout to other markets now, like North America. Yeah, so yeah, it's really fantastic.
There's one question which somebody has
Yeah,
asked. I'm going to go ahead and say it's a
yeah,
good time to.
yeah, yeah.
So Steve has asked, what are some of the practices that you've experimented with or tried as you've gone through that amount of
Mm.
sprints?
Um, well, so you have your standard practices, I guess. You've got the typical agile ceremonies that we have adopted or put into place. In terms of outside of that, is that the question? Like,
Yeah, I
what's
think that's the question from what I'm kind of reading into it is, outside of, again, like you said, standard practices, hey, we're going to have our daily coordination meeting, we're going to have our iteration planning meeting, those types of things. What are some of the other things based on the complexity of your situation that you've tried and experimented with?
so because as we've scaled and more markets are coming into place, as you've mentioned, Josh, and more teams, we are dependent on more teams. We put in place like a scrums call that we have just to coordinate across those teams and just make sure that we're aligned. We know what's coming up next. We can manage those dependencies. So that's definitely been a key one for us. We have a release manager in those sessions as well. We don't have product owners in there. It's really just for the scrum masters and tech leads and the release manager, just to kind of discuss what's the scope, what have you guys got coming up for the next release, what are we planning, and how we're mapping out those dependencies. So yeah, for sure, that's been a really good one. Yeah, and obviously the standard agile ceremonies have all played a massive part, and we keep to those 36 sprints in. We still do our retros, we still do our end of sprint demos. I think where I alluded to previously, at the times where they got comfortable, those things were falling away, which was a shame, and it was kind of hard to bring those back in. But the team were nearing the end. They saw the light at the end of the tunnel. It'd been a long slog for them. But without those, it can kind of just water it down a little bit, and you can kind of lose sight of those key processes and practices, which we definitely try to maintain today at Diageo, for sure.
Hmm. And one other quick question is from Paul, and Paul is asking, what are some of the characteristics you observe in your high performing teams?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, and I don't know where to start because it's collaboration. It's we have a way, and I mean that in terms of it's everybody is collaborating, from the product owner through to the developers. It's We're one team. There is no what's the word? There's no like hierarchy. We're just all in one team. Nobody's managing us. We are self-organizing. We own our tasks. We own our respective areas. We come together and make sure that we deliver. So it's collaboration, I would say, is key, and the communication is there, and it is coming together for those key meetings, showcasing what's been done in a given sprint, uh, looking back on what could be improved. The product owner is involved in those sessions. He's hearing some hard truths potentially. He's willing to accept them. We're all there to embrace any change and feed anything back into our processes and ways of working. So I think it's the willingness to accept the change and embrace agile, embrace that way of working.
Yeah, and I think that again, I've been a little away from that organization for a small period of time now, but I know that based on when I was there, the amount of value that you're now able to deliver in a pretty consistent way has not only, you said, been kind of showcased as one of the ways to adopt disciplined agile within your organization, but also there are other areas, other large markets that product is also in, and those teams are looking to learn some of the lessons of what you guys have discovered.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, I'm like shadowing those teams, just shadowing, just kind of dropping in on sessions, and it's interesting to see where the gaps are, maybe to see where, and it might be the basic things. It might be product owners aren't present, It might be developers don't seem to be empowered or don't feel like they're empowered enough to speak up in retros or on daily stand-ups. So you have other people answering for them. It's the basics sometimes that you're seeing. But yeah, so where we are now, we weren't always, we evolved. Like, and I keep saying this to people, like, we started out where it was hard to conjure up that team spirit. It was hard to get people to speak up in the daily stand-ups or the sprint planning sessions, to ask questions. But we kept with it, and it was like, reinforcing that this is your chance to ask questions, because you're going to commit to these stories to the product owner. So, take the chance to ask questions to make sure that you fully understand. And it took time, like it did. It took 3 sprints for sure before we kind of got a benchmark for our velocity. But beyond that, it took time for us to come together and bond as a team. And now, everybody participates.
Yeah. So another, the questions just keep coming in, but this is one that all ties into this. So Anne is asking, based on what you now know about Disciplined Agile and from what it sounds like of attending some workshops, what would you have done potentially differently when you first got engaged at Diageo and the team or teams that you're supporting?
So when I joined Diageo, the two came together really. I think it's fair to say, Josh. So they collided in a way that I joined, and also the transformation was happening. What would I? Oh, that's a good question. What might I do? What might I have done differently with Agile now? Just trying to think.
So
Well, I was just going to say, like, forming the teams. So looking at where everybody, I called out that everybody was, most of the teams geographically distributed around the world. There isn't a country or corner that somebody's not in. And I think maybe looking at that and trying to make sure that our developers, or as much as possible, were maybe a little bit more co-located and not so distributed, would be something that I would maybe have considered as putting forward as a recommendation. But then that said, like, we have evolved and we've worked as a distributed team. We're all on Zoom. We're all, like, a call away. So it's a bit difficult, I think, to say that as well, that we may change that, because it's worked as it is today.
yeah, and one of the things, so I'll recall a little bit of actually in Linda was in not only in some of the workshops, the DA workshops, but you had participated in the choosing your wow, one of the exercises, and I still recall something that came up when there was a question about forming teams, and we were looking from a requirements perspective. And so that's something that I would also just kind of interject, that I know it's hard when you get put on the spot like that with some of these questions, but just the initial arrangement of how your core versus market requirements and focus and all of that, that's an area that I always felt could have had a little more opportunity, some additional experimentation to really see from a throughput perspective how value could have been delivered quicker, maybe to a core market, or maybe to a market that wasn't core, to be able to sort of get some validated feedback a little bit quicker. So something in that space, and you had actually chimed in on some of that during the exercise that I still recall, which is one of the things that I thought was great.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The model that we've taken now, and I think, decisions are made fast and furious. As you know, like, yeah, it seemed it's a model that we took on in terms of, we've got like our main pod team squad, and then on the side of that we've got like smaller market deployment pods that are rolling out configuration basically for the smaller markets. It's working, but it was a decision that was made probably quite quickly. But we tried it and we tested it, and it seems to be up and running and deploying on time, which is the main thing, I guess, for everybody.
So Sarjeski has a question. I know we're getting kind of close on time, and I'm trying to get through them just as the way that they've come through earlier. But what was the importance of leadership, and is there anything that you saw that could have possibly been different if they might have had a little bit more awareness of some of the discipline agile principles and value and so forth?
So for elsewhere, because I guess at Diageo it was embraced for the most part, and still is the way to go. I think for anywhere that's looking to adopt agile, it's about that mindset. It's about the collaboration. It's about ensuring that everybody from the execs to the developers is all on the same page and is working together. And shifting that mindset is probably one of the hardest things that there is to do.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And one last one that I think we can get to from Beth. And Beth is asking about the possibilities of an improved way of working. So I know one of the things that, we teach in some of the workshops is the Kaizen loop, where we're actually trying to use that as a very small little flow for identifying areas for improvement. Any thoughts there?
Um, yes, because I think we could be at risk of being in that post-agile phase, that comfortable phase for sure as well. And I remember saying to the developers not that long ago on our stand-up, like, we just, it's okay. Maybe we don't need to talk every day. Like we could do, we're all always communicating. I was like, do you want to go to every other day? And they didn't. They wanted to keep the routine, which is fantastic. So for that part, I think we're good. It's maybe the continuous deployment, the other side of it. I mean, at the moment we're deploying once a month, which is great. So it's about 2 sprints worth of work that we managed to get out. And we're seeing that increase because we're introducing automation of progression testing and the way that we're our UAT test scripts and all that good stuff, we're seeing a reduction in the amount of time that we're spending in UAT, which is allowing us to increase the amount of work that we can deploy. But I think for sure that's an area that we could work on, and is probably the next item on my agenda to see whether or not how we could address that. Where are the delays? What's slowing us down? Why can't we go faster?
Yeah, excellent. We are, unfortunately, the time always passes so quickly in these sessions. I know that we have a few more questions that we'll provide a follow-up, so Linda and I can get together and provide some answers and put those out as a blog post. And as always, I want to first thank you, Linda, for taking your time and sharing your experiences, which has been fantastic. For those of you that are in attendance, again, thank you very much for attending. I see some of are now becoming regulars that are on the attendee list. And next week, we've got another great topic. We'll be talking about using Disciplined Agile in non-software development situations. So from a business perspective, taking an agile way of working and using some of the somewhat new life cycles in DA now that are specifically around that. So I'd like to welcome everybody back, and thanks again, Linda.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. Great.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. See you next week.